Immigration remains a hot political topic, but today we ask if it's emigration that we need to worry about. Why are younger people fleeing our shores? In Northern Ireland, we ponder the licensing reform ducked by Stormont that means strange things happen, like Lidl opening a pub in a supermarket in Dundonald. And we examine the one missing element of that much trailed and much leaked and much disputed budget: growth. Hello and welcome to Trading Up Unpacked. I'm Jim Fitzpatrick.
And I'm Richard Ramsey.
And this is the business podcast from the Irish News, produced in association with EY, where myself and the Professor of Practice from Queen's Business School dig deep into the big business issues of the day. And remember, you can get in touch with us at any time on email. It's tradinguppodcast@gmail.com, or drop us a comment on the socials on LinkedIn or wherever you find us. Richard, I want to start with the budget. I heard someone describe it as the Klarna budget, which was essentially the basis of that was spend now, pay later. Everybody gets the little offer to spread the cost of something. I love that actually, by the way, when you get that on a spending app, it says, would you like to share this with your friends? I'm thinking, I'm sure my friends would appreciate it if I sent them the bill for whatever it was I was paying for. But in terms of the Chancellor, what she has done, yes, she's spreading the cost to us, the taxpayers, but not now. She's spending the money and she's going to collect from us later on down the line. So let's look at what she's spending first of all. Let's talk about that spending bill because spending's continuing to go up.
Yep. So, yes, in terms of spending, there were the measures that she announced. There was actually a number of requirements for increased spending linked to some of the welfare spending even before the new measures which were announced, but there was issues there, and there was also demands were rising, particularly in terms of special educational needs and disability, which is also an issue in Northern Ireland as well. But what we saw in terms of the budget measures, the kind of key ones that she announced, it was looking at bringing in over 11 billion by 29-30, and it was largely welfare. That's what that was kind of funding. It was to fund some of the welfare U-turns, the winter fuel payments, and the disability PIP sort of payments. Part of those, which there was this summer U-turn, so those are being funded. But the big kind of flagship policy in terms of spending was then the removal of the two-child limit for benefits, which was then seen to be kind of a red meat policy for the left wing of the Labour Party.
A hefty price tag with that one, because it's one of those policies which certainly when it was introduced, it's hard to justify really, taxing people who, or at least removing benefits from people who have more than two kids. But once it's in place, then the savings from that feed through, and now to remove it means that, how many billions is it going to cost? Is it like 9 billion or something? Or is it as much as that?
Yeah, I don't think it's as much as that, but it will then for the average for the UK households which are going to avail of this, it'll be an average of £5,300 pounds a year for them. So
a big uplift, obviously, in the personal basis. Big cost overall to the taxpayers, and what she's done, though, with the budget is defer, how and when she lifts those taxes. So let's talk about the how first of all. So there's a promise not to raise income tax. That hasn't happened directly, but what she's done is frozen the rate at which, or the point at which you start paying tax, whether it be for your personal allowance or the basic rate or the higher rate, which means that more people are dragged into the tax system because of inflation as things develop. So it's a stealth tax, and quite a hefty one as well.
Yep, and similarly with national insurance contributions as well, the fact that those thresholds were frozen again, and yeah, so that's what they're doing. They're trying to, if you think back to the Labour Party manifesto, they were then saying, well, if you go back to 2024, the general election, the public finances were in a bit of a mess following the pandemic and having been hit by not just the pandemic, but also the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and then through the pandemic, you think of all the furlough spending, all the kind of money and loans which were given out, and grants, and eat out to help out, you name it. They fired the money out the door. Essentially, the bill was then going to be delivered after the general election. The Conservatives and Labour Party knew this, but nobody was coming. But they were all jockeying for position just to win the election, that they were saying we're not going to increase taxes, or the kind of key ones, the income tax rate, etc. What the Labour government did say, that they were going to raise 8.6 billion of taxes, but what they have done, both from the budget last year, and which was the national insurance contributions, employers hit with that, business hit, the whole farmers and agriculture hit with all their various measures, and then it was like inheritance tax for businesses. That was like a key kind of thing. But there was 40 billion of tax revenue, then of taxes levied last year, and now it's 26 billion this year. But as you say, most of that is being backloaded back to 2029, 30, which is roundabout, or 2029, roundabout whenever the next general election is coming in. So, but in the meantime, it's been borrow for more spending, and also that some of the taxation is used then to spend more, particularly on welfare as well. But
Yeah, and
it brings in a lot of money.
It brings in a lot of money if it all follows through. And I think actually what the Chancellor is doing is pushing through some of the legislation to reassure the markets that she won't back down in an election year and kind of forget about these tax rises. The markets being the bond markets, who want to ensure that the government has enough money to spend relative to what it says it's going to do. So we'll see that legislation coming through, which essentially then commits them to those tax rises. But, you know, when you think about this government, its promises before the election not to put up taxes on working people, let's just say they've been a bit creative about how they've gone about that by freezing the thresholds rather than raising income tax directly. But one of the other big promises they made was that they said they were going to be a government for growth. So where is growth in this budget? Where is the focus on growth? Where are the measures designed to boost growth? Where is the strategy for growth?
Good question. And that's what a lot of economists were commenting on, and being critical of the fact that this certainly wasn't a budget for growth. And indeed, the OBR, whenever they look at all their measures, they said that there's none of the measures within the budget will have a material impact on, in terms of contributing to economic growth. So that was a concern. And I know in many ways budgets aren't always viewed to be they're not meant to be designed necessarily to be, this is where our economic growth is coming from, but they should have part of the economic strategy, the plan. And you even think of that the Labour government, whenever they came in with a majority, there was a hope that they would, there was a hope probably in markets that they would be a kind of reincarnation of New Labour. They had a worse inheritance than Tony Blair and Gordon Brown had.
In terms of the picture of the economy, but yeah.
But that they would then be able to do sort of like some kind of like, whether it's reforms and... but what we've saw with this kind of budget has been second budget, and it's all very piecemeal, and it doesn't seem to be well thought out. There doesn't seem to be, it's lacking in strategy. It seems it's a bit like the countdown numbers round, you know, where a button has been pressed for they want 26 billion, and instead of hitting the big tax drivers like income tax, they've gone for the smorgasbord, and it's been like kind of 2 from the top, 2 from the bottom, and 2 from anywhere else.
And now, like Carol Vorderman, she's going to make the sums add up.
Yeah.
But I mean, to be fair to them, actually, I suppose the one thing they've done, and this applies more in England than here because of devolution, but they've gone for planning reform, which is broadly being welcomed by sort of people in business and people wanting to get things built, because they've been willing to say we're going to, you know, prioritise economic requirements over, say, local objections. And that's the principle. We'll see how it all plays out, but that's a big strategic move that at least they've done that.
Yeah, yeah. So no, that is good, and then that's going to be a bit of a slow burn, but we're certainly going to need to see more of that in due course. But some of the areas where it's if you look at the income tax kind of thresholds, there's a lot of cliff edges in the taxes. So if you even take in terms of 100,000 salary mark, which everybody will sort of think, oh, that's a fantastic salary. But if you earn £1 over 100,000, you lose your personal tax allowance. And
that's the bit that you have at the beginning.
The 12,570 odd, and so you kind of lose that, and then you'll also, if you're then particularly in England, that if it's then access to so many hours of childcare, you could potentially lose that. So you're then ending up having a marginal rate of taxation of like about 62% over 100,000. So what you have is a lot of people who are earning that are the people who are, if they choose not to, and then they reduce their hours in order to get below the 100,000, which is what a lot of people are doing. It, which like, give me a pay cut to get back under that level. That is preventing, economic activity, reducing economic activity. So there should be plans to try and sort those kind of things out and those kind of tapering. And
so there's been no kind of reform of the tax system, no attempt to make it simpler. We have a notoriously difficult and kind of complicated tax system which has all of these disincentives within it, and maybe this is a budget that's just maybe created more of those.
Yeah, and then it's even when you think of the optics where, and we saw in the headlines of the tabloids just after the morning after the budget, where it was all about benefit street or high tax, high welfare. And it's the optics of welfare, and a lot of the thresholds for benefits are uprated in line with inflation, and then pensioners as well. Their triple lock is intact, and it's being uprated, increased by 4.8% for pensioners. But those people in work, they aren't getting the uprating, and it's just the optics of saying those who are working, you're going to pay. And those who are on benefits and pensioners, you're going to be
you'll be okay. In fact,
you'll be okay. It'll be
a
paid
rise
for the workers.
Yeah, and I think it must feel very unfair to a lot of people in that kind of middle ground who are in the middle of their careers, working, trying to, if you like, do better, go for promotions and so on, and they're looking at all of these ways in which they're going to be hit with more taxes, and yet someone who has retired is getting the benefits of that triple lock operating in their pensions, and the cost of that is being borne, by those workers. And so there was one figure which I know you'd pulled out there, which is quite startling, and this was from Tom Calver in the Sunday Times, that only 4 in 10 UK households make a net contribution to the state, i.e. that they, put more in than they get out. So just 4 in 10 households. That's pretty kind of scary, because it means those 4 in 10 are paying for the other 6 in 10, and that's likely to get tighter as the years progress.
Yeah, and you think back in the 2000s, it was the the kind of middle income households, they were net contributors. So it's just becoming more and more people are taking more out than they're putting in. And I suppose the question for what would the figures look like for Northern Ireland, would it be 2 or 3 households would be net contributors? It would be that kind of level, and it is. And the dangers there is if you're then starting to put more of your pressure on where you get your tax revenue on a smaller and smaller cohort, that is potentially difficult going forward, particularly if, we often hear about kind of taxing the rich and the wealthy, but if they disappear and choose to go elsewhere, you're potentially losing a lot of revenue there.
Yeah, again, within the figures, highest 1% of earners account for 30% of the income tax bill. So they do, overall contribute quite a chunk. And I know there's the talk of people, disappearing to Dubai and all of that kind of stuff. And perhaps some of that reporting is overdone. But if you lose one of those really high-paying taxpayers, it takes a lot of kind of ones from the bottom to make up for what you've lost from them.
Because if you take the average additional rate taxpayer. So those are people who are paying over or who are on the 45% rate, which is over 125,000 a year. There's 11,000 of those people in Northern Ireland, according to HMRC figures. But they have an average pay an average income tax of 105,000, but if you're a lower rate taxpayer, that's a 20% rate. You pay 2,900. So if you were to lose one of those additional tax ratepayers, you would need to replace them with 36 lower rate taxpayers to bring in the same tax revenue.
Wow, that's quite a lot. Yeah, and those let's talk about those ones with all of that those big tax bills. The other thing they're maybe concerned about is this potential levy on the mansion tax, as they're calling it. The 2 million plus houses are going to have to pay an extra levy, and it's coming in in a couple of years' time, and it's not coming in straight away. But I see some reports that already houses are going on the market and being sort of repriced below the 2 million level in order to try and shift them before this comes into effect. And it's, even though it might play well for Labour backbenchers to say we've got a mansion tax, the economic impact of that is kind of messy, and it's not necessarily going to raise the money that the Treasury wants.
And again, it's almost they've gone for a almost like totemic tax, which is not well thought through, because if you look at the council tax, what needs to happen in England is they need to do a total revaluation of all the properties, because the last time they were revalued was in 1991. So you're ending up getting these things where a mansion in the parts of London, the southeast, is basically paying the same level of council tax as certain properties in Sunderland and Bolton, and they're drawing all these things. So it needs to be totally redone, a total revaluation of all properties. But this is almost like a quick fix. That no, what we'll do is just fire a levy on to any property over 2 million, and this will bring in, and whether again that's seen to be, it's sending out the signals, oh, we're hitting the rich, we're taxing the rich, but it's not well thought through. They need to look at totally redoing the council tax, but that's something which they haven't done. So once again, shied away from reform.
Yeah, something actually I noticed in your notes to this, I'm not to take issue with you here. You were saying that one of the positives, like a kind of sensible measure, if you like, was this new levy on electric cars. So you're going to have to pay a kind of an amount every year. Is it 3p per mile based on your mileage, and they'll check your mileage, and then you have to pay this new tax if you drive an electric car. I thought the whole point of the incentives from government was to get people to switch to electric. Now they just want to tax you if you do. So, why do you think that's a good idea?
I think it's a good idea because the UK Treasury then will get there, or the HMRC will bring in about 30 billion a year from petrol and diesel duty. So once we then get to the point where there are basically no more petrol and diesel cars and they're all electric, once you get to that stage, you've then lost your 30 billion of revenue. So what they need to do is then look at new ways of bringing in revenue to replace that, because if they don't do it in fuel duty, they're going to have to do it on freezing the tax thresholds again for more years, or income tax, or somewhere else. And so I think it's good, and I would give them credit that they've actually started this. I think what they have suggested is still lacking in detail, and ultimately what you would need to have, because if it's going to be, they're just going to ask people to go to your MOT centre and they check the mileage. What do they do about new cars, or is that just going to be
take it on trust? Although funny, I was looking this up, right, because I've got an electric car. You have as well, don't you? So you actually wanting to be taxed more. I can't get my head around this. So I was looking this up from a personal point of view, thinking, I've got this electric car and now they want to tax me. Not delighted. But anyway, apparently the suggestion at the moment is that you would take it to an MOT centre. You would have to have it verified what your mileage was in order to calculate how much you owed. you'd pay it up front based on your previous year's usage, and that's all very well. But if you tried to get an MOT in Northern Ireland recently, so I suppose that's maybe the one get out. Well, I wanted to pay my tax, but unfortunately I couldn't get an appointment for the next 6 months.
But ultimately, what economists would see is, because what they're doing is they're talking about just charging this as based on the miles that you do. But the miles that you do, if you're driving around country roads and that's how you clock up your miles, or as opposed to clocking up 10,000 miles a year and you're coming into Belfast city centre and clogging the traffic and all the congestion and stuff like that, you should be paying more, because there's more of a cost in terms of the congestion on time and on other drivers and your usage of the road space there. So ultimately, I think there should be congestion charging. And that's what economists would then say about, in terms of that you should do it that way rather than just having a flat charge for the number of miles.
Let's face it, if anybody uses Google Maps or any of like TomTom or any of the kind of sat-nav type devices, that has real-time information tracking where people are driving. If you go onto your Google Maps, you can see what the traffic is like because it's getting all the information fed from everybody else's devices. So there would be presumably a way of doing this that could be implemented fairly quickly using existing technology, where you could base it, so you pay perhaps a higher charge depending on time of the day, as you say, or whether you're in the city centre or on a country road or on a motorway or wherever it might be. And actually, I can see the logic to that.
That's all about taxes incentives.
Yeah.
It incentivizes the driver to, and in many ways it's the same way as the way TransLink, they try and work it so that we have the glider lanes and the bus lanes so that it's actually more beneficial and there's a benefit for using that, and there's the cost of driving in. Because it used to be when there were no bus lanes, you were having 2 lanes of traffic coming in. Now it's 1, and it's all those kind of things is what they're trying to do.
Yeah, well, if you bring up bus lanes, we could be here all day because I think one of the problems with the bus lanes is that they don't have enough buses to justify taking up the road space for the bus lanes, and I'd be really interested for somebody to do a proper study of their efficacy. However, I do think that you need to encourage people onto public transport. So, some kind of more sophisticated use of the road would make sense. Congestion charging certainly would make sense, and something that maybe then applied across all types of vehicles. So it isn't a case. I think the problem with the way it seems at the moment, I get what you're saying about having to sort of make up for that lost tax revenue, but it sounds like you're suddenly punishing people for driving electric cars, even though I know people pay fuel duty on combustion engines. But you pay 5%, I suppose, but you pay VAT on the electricity, if you're charging up your car at home. So you're sort of being doubly taxed in some ways. And I think the cost is it's taking the incentive sort of saving from an electric car, cutting it in half, I think is roughly what the initial calculations on this are. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But on the bigger picture again, what I wanted to look at, and I mentioned at the top there, was, we hear a lot, people talking about immigration figures, and that's been a huge political topic, particularly across the UK in the last year or two. But nobody's been talking about emigration, and recent figures suggest that actually emigration is something we should be concerned about. And maybe there's a link here with the budget. Maybe we can't draw this too directly, but if we have an economic system at the moment which isn't really rewarding young people and isn't really rewarding people in the middle to be ambitious, and maybe they feel the cost of living and so on here is high, we're starting to see figures where younger people are leaving to go elsewhere, and that's not great for an economy either.
No, and it's kind of the idea of then, what we've seen in the budget is it a tax on ambition, and will people go elsewhere? And the Office of National Statistics, so they had their last week the net migration to the UK, so it fell by 2/3 over the year to June 2025 to 204,000, and that's the lowest level since COVID, down from 649,000 the year before. But interestingly, there was a net outflow of both UK and EU citizens over that period. there were 70,000 more EU citizens left the UK than came in. But with UK citizens, there was 109,000 more UK citizens left the country than arrived. And what is concerning is when you look at the age profile of that 109,000 who left, 3/4 of them were under the age of 35.
That is, it's quite remarkable when you think about, where we're sitting here in Belfast and think about 1980s, Ireland, south of the border. Emigration was a huge topic and a big drain on the economy because, young people were leaving to go elsewhere. They managed to fix that with the economy, and then the young population became a huge, important aspect of Ireland's kind of economic rebound. But if we're losing young people, and people under the age of 35 to me are young, that's not great. And maybe it does say something about what's going on in the UK, not to overstate it, but it's something that maybe we need to take a look at.
And particularly when you think of skills shortages, and we always hear about then in the health service shortages there, and you even think in terms of medics, doctors, attracted to Canada, Australia, both in terms of the climate, but also then in terms of bigger salaries. And I know Wes Streeting has been coming back and then trying to boost salaries for the NHS and kind of similarly to a degree here in Northern Ireland. If you then see then the tax system is then changing, salary sacrifice is being hit, that's making it less attractive. And when you compare it to other opportunities abroad, and that makes it more difficult in terms of attracting key people. And then if you then even get your entrepreneurs, your business people and all of those kind of things, similarly for them, they will just they could just head on elsewhere, and that's a big blow to the economy.
Yeah, I suppose the national minimum wage has gone up considerably in recent years, so you'd have thought that would appeal to young people who are going to benefit from that, and particularly those at the younger end of things. The national minimum wage there is going up considerably for them too. But I suppose if they don't feel that the opportunities are there, once they get into decent jobs, then that's where maybe they're looking for opportunities elsewhere. And interesting that on those figures, it's a lot of EU citizens as well. So the idea, when the UK was part of Europe, was part of the single market for movement of people, the freedom of movement allowed a lot of people to come from elsewhere in Europe to the UK, and the economy was booming. And that was part of the reason, it seems, why people voted for Brexit. But those people who are leaving are people who presumably still had the right to stay here because they'd been here already. The economic opportunities in Europe are probably better than they are in the UK as far as they're concerned.
And you've seen that the kind of labour market has turned over the last six to 12 months in the UK. Unemployment rate's now up at 5%. You then had Rachel Reeves. One of the things they're kind of blaming for that is the costs in terms of employers' national insurance contributions, and then you've got things like AI and how that's impacting on graduate recruitment. There's a lot of the consultancy firms are reducing their head count. So yeah, and I think the issue with the national minimum wage brought in first Labour government back in 1997.
And we should say, actually, a key person in all of that was Professor Sir George Bain, who was previously Vice-Chancellor at Queen's University after that, but he was head of the Minimum Wage Commission, which came up with the first minimum wage. But it was sort of outsourced to that commission at that time. It wasn't directly determined by government, and maybe we've seen that sort of merge now more into a political tool rather than.
Yeah, but if you think what has happened if you think of the minimum wage in the UK, it was back in, say, even 2015, it was 48% of the median wage, whereas now, and that was on a par with the OECD average of countries, whereas today it's now 2/3, 66%, which is 15% above the OECD average. So what that means is that the national minimum wage is more generous in the UK and Northern Ireland than a lot of other Western developed countries, and particularly in Europe. And we probably notice that whenever we think of costs and when we're away on holidays in Spain. And I can remember even I think it was the price of a bottle of Corona in Spain, and it was significantly cheaper than it is here. But there's probably other issues.
There's others I know we're going to get to, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's even then, if you think of what has happened to the national minimum wage, and I think part of it is used to, it's almost perceived to, I think it's being asked to do too much. Because if you're increasing the national minimum wage, and if you think what they've done for 16 to 18-year-olds, they've increased it from 2019 until its current level has pretty much doubled. And then it's going to increase again from April next year. It's the extent to which we are now at a point that the level of the national minimum wage is actually going to lead to job losses. It is going to discourage, particularly in terms of the hospitality sector. People are going to think, no, this is too much of a cost. We're going to have to look at doing something else, or you have reduced hours and we use it in a different way. So I just think it has gone too far, too fast. And if you even think now, the national minimum wage in Northern Ireland is 76% of the private sector average.
Yeah. So it's actually...
So then that leads to even things like, again, incentives. If the actual, the premium between a minimum wage job and then people going up to the next level, they may feel as if it's like, I can get to minimum wage, and the people going for higher jobs then feel, wait a minute, I could just, if I was doing less and not chasing, being more ambitious and looking for more responsibility and stuff, the minimum wage is getting more comfortable. But it's also, you have to think of, it's one thing getting the big increase in the national living wage, but if you can't get a house, and we know what's happened with rents in Northern Ireland, up over 50% over the last 5 years. There's all of those issues sorted. So by trying to sort out everything and improve somebody's living standards through the national living wage, that's not going to be enough. It depends on what's happening with inflation, availability and affordability of housing, and all of those sort of issues as well.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, maybe it's just been asked to do too much. And it's interesting there at that, if you're talking about the minimum wage, maybe creating now, because it's gone up so much, creating a disincentive for people to want to progress, take more responsibility, presumably work harder, have more hassle. But if the actual pay increase isn't being offered because employers are already squeezed on the wage bill because of the increase in the minimum wage, if they're not getting much of an uplift, then people may decide, well, it's not worth the hassle. And the same way that we've talked about at the other end of the tax scale, if it's going to push you up into a higher rate tax bracket, you might think, no, I'd rather not do that, not take that promotion, or maybe ask for a 3-day week as opposed to a 5-day week in order to try and keep my tax bill down. So these are the disincentives that some of this can create. But in terms of that issue of housing, then, yeah, I mean, in some ways, there's positives there. If you own a house in Northern Ireland, Northern Ireland's outperforming all other UK regions year on year. Residential property prices increased by more than any other UK region in Q3 2025, up 7% versus a 2.9% UK average. So that's positive if you own a house. Of course, the negative is there aren't enough houses being built. And if you're looking to buy a house or rent one, you're squeezed.
Yep. And interestingly, though, the prices are still, in the third quarter of 2025, they're still below that freak peak of 2007 Q3 that we remember so well, still almost 9% below that. But if you look at what's happened since the pandemic and since it took off at the tail end of the first quarter of 2020, again, Northern Ireland has seen higher cumulative price rises than any other UK region. And you've got, so it's 45% has been the increase, which compares to 27% for the UK. But
nothing really being done to meet the demands of young people who want to get on the housing ladder, and even forgetting about that idea of the housing ladder, just getting a house or getting a flat or an apartment. If you look in Belfast, for instance, you see a lot of building going on, but it's student accommodation. Whatever the problems are in the planning system, there is a serious blockage on getting other housing developments off the ground. Obviously, we know there's been restrictions because of water infrastructure issues, so that a lot of planning developments are held up because of that. But there are other issues which are slowing down any other development. And yet, it's a much bigger city, but compare Belfast with Manchester, and what's happened in Manchester over the last sort of decade or so. You know, high-rise developments, lots of city centre developments, lots of young people living in the city and then creating economic activity in the city. And you wonder here in a place like Belfast, what happens to those students who are at Queen's and Ulster University when they've finished university, they've been in their nice student accommodation. You know, where do they go if they want to go and rent somewhere? What are the options for them?
Yeah, and that is the challenge. And there's kind of also then a lack of a lot of quality private sector rental sort of accommodation as well. And you've seen rental supply has decreased. You've seen a lot of landlords, because of what's been happening to making being a landlord less and less attractive over the years since George Osborne, and again in this budget, any landlords will be hit with a 2 percentage point increase in terms of any of their tax income from property. And it's going to be the shortage of supply of rental properties. But if you look at what's been happening in terms of, well, it's also been the lack of house building, which is creating this supply shortage. And we've had this legacy of underbuilding since the Northern Ireland had the biggest house price crash in UK history. We don't kind of brag about that much, but and as you say, it's been compounded by the inadequate wastewater infrastructure. But so we've had there were a lot of the big, large-scale house builders in Northern Ireland, unfortunately, have gone. You think of the Carville Group, you think of Patton Homes, to name but a couple of them. And then in 2023, we were building the fewest number of houses since 1959. So obviously, that's not a good look. 2024, we've seen a bit of an improvement. That slipped back slightly in 2025. We are seeing housing starts as opposed to completions. That started to pick up a bit, but it's still way, way off. And, the challenge is, because of supply, you're seeing that's contributing to house prices. It's contributing to the private sector rents going through the roof, and that makes it increasingly difficult to attract people and workers to Northern Ireland. If giving them a salary, getting them a job is one thing. Increasingly, it's can you actually find
can you not find a nice accommodation? Yeah, I mean, it seems to be one of those problems, and there's global issues at play here, and it's not just a factor here. Obviously, it's been a huge factor in politics in the Republic. The shortage of available accommodation has been an issue there. If we look, say, to the election of the new mayor in New York, Zoran Mamdani, his policy very much about affordability, but linked to housing as well. And if you listen to anybody who's kind of studied these issues, whether it's here or anywhere else in the world, I mean, the solutions are basic, but they're not cheap. The bottom line is you need to find a way to build more housing, lots more of it, because it's a supply and demand issue. If you have more of it and build more of it, you will eventually reduce the price, and whether that's the price to buy or the price to rent. And yet, it's been staring at politicians here and elsewhere in the face for a long time now, and they've done very little to actually address it.
Yeah, but it's almost ironically, whenever you think, because we've heard in this whole kind of budget week all about those with the broadest shoulders should bear the brunt of the budgetary pain and all of those kind of things. And if you actually think with Stormont's policy of no water charges, and when you feed that through in terms of what that has led to, and the lack of house building that cannot go forward, it is actually the policy was basically it doesn't matter what width your shoulders are, whether they're narrow or broad, no water charge or extra rates is required for that. But then whenever you think about those people with the narrowest shoulders are the ones who are having to pay the big surge in private sector rents, are unable to get housing, get any roof above their head. You've got the big waiting list for social housing, all of those kind of things. So it's almost like one policy, if you look at, while ideologically it seems good and something you want to support, if you feed all through the outcomes, it is leading to terrible outcomes which are going to get worse and worse and worse as years go by.
Yeah, so yeah, it's a really interesting point that obviously nobody wants to pay water charges if they can avoid them. But if you were to explain to people the consequences of not having water charges is X, Y, and Z, and among that is a lack of house building, an inability to get social housing built as well, a lack of funding for our wastewater infrastructure, which impacts on all of this. If you would explain that we keep this policy and you live with all of that, or we try and address that, and one of the solutions that is to bring in some water charges, perhaps then people might be more open to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's about being realistic, and maybe we just haven't had enough of that. So let's talk about another funny stormont policy, which I think you've been interested in, and what will we call it? Will we call it the no surrender principle?
The no surrender, yeah, we'll never give it up.
Not an inch. And it's all about licensing. We have a very peculiar and antiquated system of licensing here in Northern Ireland for pubs, for off sales, and essentially it comes down to the idea that you want to ensure that you don't have more, that you keep having the same number or a decreasing number of licenses, because licensing drinking is bad. Effectively, that seems to be the source of this policy, and therefore you don't give out new licenses. And therefore, if anybody wants to open a new pub, they've got to take a license from somewhere else and prove the need for it in the new location that they're going to.
One in, one out policy, kind of effectively.
Right. So that's how it's happened for years. And I suppose the consequence of that is that we have pub licenses here, which themselves, regardless of how your business is trading, the actual license is now worth a lot of money, because in order to have a pub, you need to have a license. And so the license is worth a lot of money. And therefore, anytime they come and look at whether or not they should do reform of this system, there's a lot of vested interest, who are a little bit concerned that those licenses that they've invested in could be worth less money if they give out a lot more of them. But that's not the reason why Gordon Lyons, the minister in charge, has turned down the recommendations from a commission that his own department set to work at a cost of about £500,000, who suggested reform. They've just, for what logic have they given for not reforming the system?
I'm not sure the exact logic of
So
why they
you're trying to, I think the look on your face is, logic's not the word I would use. Is that what you're saying?
Well, because I don't think they were giving clear reasons why, because I know there was then people from the hospitality sector were coming out and protecting it, and they said that they wanted, which was kind of essentially protecting the incumbents in the system as opposed to being able to open it up to competition. Because one of the strange things, and I'm probably going to use this as a case study with my MBA students in terms of policies and anti-competitive behaviour, and we even think in terms of the whole issue and back of the budget was all about productivity. We need to improve productivity. One of the productivity drivers is competition and promoting competition, and this is the licenses. There's a number of reasons why you do it the way you're doing it, but there's a lot of anti-competitive behaviour in here, because actually if somebody is going to try and buy a license, a pub license, existing license holders or pubs can complain and block that, which, imagine that was with retail, imagine that was in the restaurant trade, imagine that was with accountancy firms or anything, that they ended up going, no, they're trying to apply for that.
Somebody's
no,
trying. So yeah, any other business, somebody
get
can
off
object
my
and say
land.
they're going to take some of my business. Therefore, you should stop them doing it. That's effectively what you're saying is happening.
Yeah, which means you cannot allow sort of competition to come in, and then that means depending on what way the kind of market and incumbents have it, it can. Then it's what some people have then said is one of the reasons why the price of alcohol and beer, pint of beer is like London prices in.
I know my kids who some of whom have gone off to university and elsewhere, when they come home with friends, maybe from London, have been surprised at the price of some of the drinks in, say, Belfast city centre pubs. So yeah, and I think what the owners, the proprietors, would say is, well, look, we've invested in these pubs, we've also invested in the licences, and we need to, basically make a return. And there are probably other arguments about the level of rates and so on that they pay, etc. But there's no doubt that compared to, say, if we compared Belfast with another city, a regional city across the UK, it probably is more expensive here, and that probably has something to do with those licensing laws. I mean, I think it has some really funny outcomes, such as the plans for Lidl to have a pub in its Dundonald store. So I think it's going to be the first Lidl. Now, you go in to get your good value fruit and veg, and you're down the middle aisle picking up a jackhammer at the weekend or whatever it is. But you can also, when you're going into Dundonald, you'll soon be able to sit down for a nice pint while you're there. And it got some headlines. But the interesting thing, the background of this story, and I did try and check. Let me just see, they haven't got back to me yet. I was checking with the PR and Lidl to see what the latest update on this story is. But I haven't heard back from them. But basically the problem was they wanted to sell, and they wanted to have an off license in the store, and some little supermarkets, along with other supermarkets, Sainsbury's and others. There are other supermarkets available, have off sales. But they've had to buy a license under the system that's been surrendered by somebody else to them. They've proven the need, they've got it in. Lidl were constantly being blocked in Dundonald from getting an off license into the store. So they said, well, tell you what, can we get a pub license? They went and bought a pub license, proved the need for that, were taken to court, but the judge said no, they've proven the need. So they're going to have a pub, and the point about having the pub is that allows you, it comes with an off license.
Yeah.
So but they're going to have to run a pub. So this will be fun to watch that play out. You can go get your groceries, sit down for a drink while you're there, and take your off sales home with you too. And maybe this was just Lidl's way of, shall we say, giving their answer to the Northern Ireland licensing law. You won't let us get an off sales. Well, we'll put a pub into the store instead.
Yeah, but there's quite a few kind of quirks with the whole kind of licensing system here, but it's also the fact that there's a lack of transparency and people are unaware of what a license would cost. So if you are potentially going to want to come in and open up a pub or do something different, it's difficult because there's effectively like estate agents for these licenses and how they marry it up. And what it said in some of the reports was that when some of the incumbents are blocking the applications of the new people trying to come in, sometimes this is sorted out with a financial payment to remove, which all seems kind of like, if you think of competition and making contestable markets and opening things up, it all seems very strange.
Yeah, it doesn't fit with your kind of free markets theory. So I can see why it might be a good case study for your MBA students. I mean, what are we talking about? Is it like 500,000 or upwards? Does the report tell us what people are paying for licenses these days? I mean, it is big numbers, isn't it?
I'm not sure in the exact figure. That's my kind of sense.
Yeah, and again, it may depend on the area and depend on how much you need to sort out other objections, I suppose.
Although they were suggesting that there could be a scheme of how you could buy those licenses out and how you could, people who do have a lot of money and value tied up in the license, how you could manage that sort of going forward. But it was kind of no surrender to the surrender principle in terms of that policy. And it's just I'm not sure whether there's going to be any more detail of how they're going to try and modernise the system in other ways, such as being the ability else in other sort of jurisdictions, you can then access and see who owns the licenses, where it was transferred from, which owner to another owner, what was the cost, all of those kind of things. And you'd sort of think in a market, that's quite good to be able to know that information. But we're in Northern Ireland trying to keep that kind of under wraps.
It's it's also, from publicans and others that I would have talked to in the trade, and the argument that you'll see put forward by Colin Neal and people like that and others, is that we do have at least it may be a little bit more expensive, but we do have a particular type of pub trade here. We've got individual pubs, maybe a bit more character than just the kind of chains that you would have across the water. So their argument coming back, as well as it preserves a kind of uniqueness of the offer in Northern Ireland. But I suppose what you're saying from an economics point of view, that comes with a price tag, it seems.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, well, we shall see what happens on that one. Are you going to head to Dundonald for your shopping whenever Lidl gets its pub opened?
I'm probably intrigued to always keen to walk around and see these kind of strange economic behaviours in
It
practice.
sounds like that could be like a little field trip with the students, couldn't it? Heading off to Lidl, you get a cheap jackhammer, as I say, in the middle aisle, and pick up a bottle of wine on the way out, and or sit down for a drink while you're there.
Your knowledge of alcoholic drinks is better than mine, Jim.
Oh well, yeah, and alcohol free, of course. So look, I think we'll leave it there for now. We shall keep an eye on those developments, and do get in touch if you've got any questions for me or for Richard. We will be back soon in a couple of weeks' time with another Trading Up Unpacked. Until then, from Richard and from me, thanks.